Hello, everyone. So, this is Lala, and today I am back with another Big Brother Archetypes video where I'm going to cover the Rednecks and the Southern Bells. I'm essentially going to put them all in one video since I do notice that the men that they tend to cast generally are either rednecks and the women are generally seen as Southern Bells. Generally, this is this archetype that kind of fits the Southern person, so people in the southern states. I guess there are some of the men that are seen as the male version of the Southern Belles, so I don't know if calling them rednecks is accurate, but as you go through the video, kind of get the feeling of what I'm trying to refer to. So, the first person that I'm going to mention is Krista from Big Brother 2, and it's clear that she was seen as America's sweetheart from casting, the network, and the cast's point of view. Obviously, she was a young mother. She lost her brother, or maybe it was her father, very tragically. She lived in a very small town in the South, and she was seemingly very, very naive, and she just wanted a better life for herself, and the entire cast felt sorry for her. She was seen as a sweetheart, but as the season went on, we definitely saw a more devious side of her, and there's a trashier side to her as well, which started to kind of rub some people the wrong way. But because they had a feeling that she was a favorite, and because of her life circumstances, they were kind of teetering on the edge when it came to targeting her until things switched up, and then she was booted. But then obviously she was talking about how she didn't want to lose her soul and whatnot. And I do think that the little bit of fame that she got on the show brought up some of those negative qualities of her, which we saw, or which was talked about during her post season. But Krista's definitely an interesting element to this because she really wasn't stereotypical. While she did kind of fit into the Southern Belle element, the more negative or trashier side of this archetype, especially for a woman, was shown here too, and it wasn't exaggerated on either side. So, crazy enough, I actually forgot about Kent, and I don't know how I let that happen because he clearly has a southern accent, and I looked it up, he's from Tennessee. So, obviously, with Big Brother 2, like I mentioned, with Krista, and like I'll mention with a few people in the next few seasons after this, they didn't really have their archetypes and stereotypes that pinned down. Obviously, I don't think they focused more much on Kent being a Southern man, but they clearly cast him to be the older conservative man, and there's a lot of rhetoric about Southern people, especially Southern men, being very conservative. Obviously, there's a lot of truth to that, but you can't say every single person from the South is like that. So there's some truth in it, but I wouldn't say it's the entire truth. Obviously, he had his thing with Bunky where he talked about not liking homosexuals and then them becoming friends in the house to the point where they became lifelong friends. Kent did have some of his dramatic moments with the likes of Mike Bunky, Justin, and even Hardy at the end. Heck, even Nicole at times, and then Monica snapped at him. And he definitely felt the generational shift between himself and the rest of the cast, and I do think some of that might have to do with him being from the South as well. But he didn't really fit into the clean cut archetype compared to most of his successors. And I think that's just due to the time that he came into Big Brother on. Chronologically, the next person is Amy, and I do feel like she has a lot of similarities with Krista in the fact that they both kind of represent the Southern Bells, but they also represent some of the less savory elements of this archetype, and some might say trashy, but I don't know if that's the most appropriate word. I do think that what makes Amy stand out is that I believe she had pageant experience, so she has a cadence about her that is different compared to a Krista, who is just a small town girl who didn't get exposed too much outside of her little town. Where when you're a pageant woman, you have to present yourself a certain way, you have to speak a certain way, you have to tell people what they want to hear, and this could come off as being very professional or being very fake. But Amy loved to drink, where it made it onto the episodes, and they kind of portrayed it as like she had an alcohol problem, and then we got to see a lot of her insecurities. We got a lot of her catty, petty, but funny commentary about all of the other house guests. And you felt like she was just being her. She wasn't being put in a box solely by the editors, only presenting her in a one-dimensional way, and she came off like a real human being. We got to see her insecurities, we got to see the positives and the negatives, and we saw a very multifaceted woman who fit this casting archetype, but she was more than the archetype, if that makes sense. Honestly, a lot of the OG men are people who I didn't really add until a lot later on in the video because I do feel like they had more elements of either being the Southern gentleman or the redneck, and I don't know if I'm going to put every single person from the South on the list, but I am adding Jason from Big Brother 3. He's interesting because obviously he has a lot of conservative values, but he didn't make that a huge part of his identity in ways that is seen as very typical for a Southern man. I believe he's from Alabama, if I read it correctly. I think a lot of the focus was on him being a virgin and being religious rather than having those other type of conservative values. Clearly, he would fit in the Southern gentleman archetype, which is definitely something that he lived up to the entire season. I don't believe he cursed. He didn't like certain vulgarities being around him. Though he didn't judge people who were into that type of stuff, which we saw in his relationship with Kiara and other house guests. So I definitely think he's interesting in the fact that he really was a Southern gentleman, which really wasn't contrived like many of the others that were after him. And he didn't have the most complex edit, despite him being from the era where it would have been more complex, but he didn't have the complete one-dimensional or stereotypical portrayal that many of his successors did either. So the next person I have here from Big Brother 4 is actually Nathan. He's from Oklahoma. There's a lot of talk about him being from Oklahoma and being proud of it. I do think that if there was supposed to be a Southern gentleman on the cast, I do believe that it was supposed to be Nathan, but due to the dynamics of the season, it being a much younger cast and a lot of focus on the relationships due to the exes twist, even though Nathan didn't have an ex, I don't think he was able to fulfill this role as much. I do remember the likes of Allison and others talking about how he's just a privileged Oklahoma boy and he was kind of the big guy in a small town. I know he had a lot of traditional talking points and beliefs throughout the game. He was very, very religious. He read the Bible a lot, and there's a lot of talk about that. Um, and yeah, he definitely had the heartthrob edit and the Southern Man edit, but that kind of got withered away within time because he got himself in quite a bit of mess throughout the season. And I just think that they didn't really know how to. This archetype wasn't as stable at this point in time in Big Brother, so they didn't know how to execute it the best. Or at least in the most stereotypical way, if I'm making sense. Alrighty, so chronologically, we are moving on to Diane, who is next. And yes, she is a Southern girl. She was from Kentucky when the season took place, and I believe she was born somewhere around the South too. So, compared to the other two women, her portrayal is definitely very different. I think a part of that is due to the fact that she was a lot more involved strategically in her season compared to the other two. And she really didn't get the Southern Belle treatment whatsoever. There wasn't talks about her being an innocent Southern woman. She didn't have that flair to her. And whenever her Southern roots came up, it was always in a way to kind of demean her. There's a lot of talk about her being trailer trash, and that was clearly something that's usually used to refer to poor, mainly Southern people, and they used it to diminish her, especially in regards to her relationship with Drew, really. A lot of people felt like she wasn't good looking enough for him. They felt like she was too unsophisticated for him, and it really You could tell it bothered her, and it brought out a lot of the insecurities that she faced throughout her life. And this even carried on with how some of the fans and the alumni who weren't even on the season felt about her. And that narrative kind of followed her throughout her entire Big Brother career. So she got more of the negative connotation compared to a mix compared to the other two women. We now have someone from the same season, and we have our first male in Cowboy. The fact that he was nicknamed Cowboy kind of says it all, though. Honestly, think about it, I don't know if the term cowboy or cowboys in general is more associated with the South or the West, or maybe it's the combination of the Southwest. But either way, cowboys from the South, I believe, Texas, so he fits in this category. And I think they called him that because there's two Michaels in the house, so whenever that happens, they always have one go by a nickname, and they chose him to go with the nickname. Literally, he entered the house wearing a cowboy hat. He, of course, had that very thick southern accent. He had the quote unquote traits of a southern gentleman, where he was a hard worker. He does anything for his lady and all of that jazz. And he had a very meek personality, where he came off like a flower to a lot of the men in the house. Though a lot of people did find him to be kind of condescending at times, and how he kind of used his situation at home as a way to gain sympathy, which definitely annoyed a lot of people in the house. And they thought that it was weird that this guy was following these two mean guys in Scott and Jay, so he really didn't have that respect factor there. But he's really the first man of this archetype, and he's definitely a very notable one, so he definitely deserves to get mentioned here, even though I don't have a whole lot to say about him in general. On to Big Brother 6, we do have two people. The first one that I'm going to talk about is Sarah, and this one's going to be quick because there's generally not much to say about her. She's from Atlanta, which was considered the South. I definitely do think that her entire journey in Big Brother was about her being the very sweet, dutiful girlfriend who kind of got screwed over due to her association with her boyfriend, James. She wasn't portrayed like a Southern Belle in the likes of an Amy or a Krista, though technically she does kind of fit it to some extent. But I just think she lacked characterization overall in comparison. And I think due to the way the season was formatted with the secret pairings and James just being a much stronger personality and much more into the game, a lot of her content revolved around that. The next person from this season is April, and she definitely had the southern twang. I think she was from Texas, but I know for sure she's from the South, and she definitely had the southern accent. What's interesting about April is that she wasn't portrayed as trashy whatsoever, but she also wasn't portrayed as a Southern Belle whatsoever either. So she technically does fit this archetype, but not in a clean cut way where you either fall into one end of the spectrum or another. A lot of her isms isn't the right word, but a lot of her phrases and her actions were definitely used as comedic relief, as in the element that we were either laughing with her or laughing at her. And I guess she's no, because it's weird because she wasn't underutilized, she wasn't toned down at all. But I think she's someone who fits this archetype that isn't as stereotypical, though she has some of the similar tropes. She's kind of the middle person when it comes to both elements, but not exclusively either. I hope I'm kind of making sense with what I am saying here. But she's definitely the southern woman who had the husband and lived that life. Now we are out of the classic era and are in the post classic era with Big Brother 8's Jessica. I think her portrayal was kind of interesting because she was portrayed as very bitchy during the first week, but that was mainly due to her rival Carol being in the house. But after Carol was booted in the first week, her edit kind of switched completely, where she was definitely portrayed as the Southern Belle sweetheart the rest of the way through. Obviously, a part of that was due to her being a cheerleader. She didn't really get involved in any drama from what I remembered. Most of the house liked her, even the people that weren't aligned with her didn't have an issue with her. She definitely had that very strong southern accent, as she came from a very good southern family. So she definitely had that. She was kind of America's sweetheart in that way as well, and it definitely benefited her in the game. I do think that she didn't become the biggest fave, or at least when it came to the producers, is due to the Donatos. And we all know that she was definitely screwed due to the America's Players twist and her being associated with Eric. So it seemed like production liked her enough to make her an eligible returnee for Big Brother 11, but that was kind of it. So she was a Southern Belle, but not in the complex way that a Krista or an Amy was, where you see the positives and negatives of that. But I do think the archetype started getting a bit stabilized. I don't know if one dimensional is the best word, but a lot more clear cuts from here on out. So we are finally moving on to Emil and Steven from Big Brother 10. And obviously there's not a whole lot for me to say about him because one, he was the second boot, and two, I don't remember him getting a whole lot of camera time. But he definitely brought a cowboy hat in the house. He was wearing that cowboy hat through a lot of the promotional material, so they're clearly playing up the fact that he was Southern, and they really pushed the Southern gay cowboy thing a lot during his brief time in the house. I know he talked about how he kind of felt like an outsider due to it, though I definitely remember him making some microaggressive comments against Libra. Ultimately, he didn't really have much time to do much of anything or to really have this explored, but it was clear that they wanted him to be that country boy who's gay, and they made that into like a tagline or something along the lines of that, but it didn't really go anywhere due to his minimal presence in the house during the little time he was there. Chronologically, the next person I have is Jordan. I actually thought about putting Memphis on the list since his nickname is Memphis, but I don't have definitive proof that he's from the South, as his location on both Big Brother seasons has him in California, and I don't know much about his background in childhood to see if he's from the South. Anyways, I definitely do think that Jordan is the prototypical Southern Belle that is associated with the show. Obviously, she was portrayed as this very mild-mannered, sweet, naive, not really smart woman who didn't grow up with a lot of money. She came from a very down-to-earth area. She's very family-oriented. And she had the look too. She had the blonde hair. I don't know if she has blue eyes. Actually, I think she does have colored eyes. So she had the prototypical sweet, idealistic white woman archetype that is kind of put on the pedestal, especially when it comes to beauty standards of white women. And she has that very thick southern accent. And I do think that her being shorter also kind of contributed to her being the idealistic southern belle. In addition to her being on the popular team on Big Brother 11, but her teammates got wiped out pretty quickly, and she was on the underdog side of the house, with her also getting with the stud of the season, i.e. Jeff. It just pretty much idealized her as the typical American woman who is in the idealized all-American showmance. And even during the few times that she did get into arguments on both of her seasons, it was always portrayed like it was very justified. So she was in the underdog position on Big Brother 11, but moving on to Big Brother 13, she wasn't an underdog anymore. She was a part of the top dog group, not only due to her being a veteran, but her and Jeff having a lot of connections to the newbies, especially compared to Brendan and Rachel. So she did the season because she wanted Jeff to win. She didn't really care to be there. And partially due to that, and I don't think they were living together at the time, so this was their time to spend a lot of time together, the entitlement really grew. So we saw Jordan whining, complaining about other people, though she would do the exact same things that she accused others of doing. And it was never really portrayed as a negative. It was always portrayed as justifiable and a positive. And then we had the moment where obviously she gave a prize during the veto competition that she won to Shelly, and then Shelly turned on Jeff, which caused Jordan to lose her mind on Shelly. So I think they could have used this to portray a multifaceted woman who fit this archetype, but they didn't really want to go there with Jordan. So they portrayed her as the all-sweet woman, even though she had other layers to her that were shown but never really focused or emphasized on. On to the next person, chronologically, is Brittany from Big Brother 12 and, of course, Big Brother 14. So she's definitely a Southern belle. She has the blonde hair, though she dyed it. She has the colored eyes, and she has the heavy accent, and she's from Arkansas. So she definitely fits this archetype. I believe she was some sort of beauty queen, if I'm remembering correctly. I'm not too sure about that, to be honest. But it's clear that she was probably cast to fit in the same archetype as Jordan and Jessica, but she stands out because Brittany is very, very, very funny. But her sense of humor is very, very, very vulgar, and it's essentially just shitting on a lot of people. This was actually portrayed very positively, where if it was someone of a different archetype, I think it would have been portrayed definitely more negatively. And I do think her fitting the archetype that she did made it easy for not only just the fans, but the house guests and the producers to give her this positive edit. And she's known as one of the main diary room queens. She definitely continued this throughout Big Brother 14, though not nearly to the same extent as Big Brother 12, but because she was put in a position of a coach, she was seen as somewhat of a leader, though she wasn't that great at it, at least according to her teammates. So she was the Southern Belle who's kind of very, very raunchy, but it wasn't portrayed in a complex or even with a negative tint as it would have with some of the earlier women of this archetype. Heck, even compared to an April, who I think she's the most similar to when it comes to just their vulgarity, is portrayed more negatively with April compared to a Brittany. But it makes sense since they're from two different eras of Big Brother. From the same season is Lane. I don't know if they were hoping that he and Brittany would eventually become a showmance, despite her having a boyfriend at the time, but it's clear that the duo got very close throughout the season, and I am sure them both being Southern played a part into it. He was definitely seen as kind of a goofball who was kind of dumb and didn't know a whole lot about anything. We didn't really get much about his strategic viewpoint in the game, despite him being in the dominant alliance until the very end, where he claimed that he wanted to go to the end with Brittany because he knew he could beat her. But in general, it was always Hayden, Matt, and Enzo getting that strategic narration. He was kind of seen as comic relief throughout a lot of the season, and that's how he was portrayed throughout the show, though from the feeds, you definitely got some weird Southern stories that are kind of problematic. Anyways, I definitely do think that he got a one-dimensional portrayal where he was seen as kind of the dumb but funny Southern guy. Yeah. Chronologically, we have Cassie from Big Brother 13, and I don't have a whole lot to say about her because, one, she's the second boot, and two, I don't think a lot of her commentary was about her being from the South, though she definitely is, as she's from Tennessee. She definitely got a more positive edit than what she did on the feed. She made a lot of really nasty comments about a lot of the women. She might have made a racist comment against Kalia as well, but that was never addressed, and she's portrayed as the good girl in her conflict with Rachel. But yeah, there's really just not much here. She didn't last long enough, and I think a lot of her commentary was more about her being a model and her looks rather than her geographic location and how that played in to things. Though that might have been why she got relatively close to Jordan, and it was why Jordan sending her home was kind of bittersweet. Okay, so from Big Brother 14, I have Frank. He's another person that I generally forgot about. It wasn't until I really got to Big Brother 18 where I realized, yeah, Frank definitely fits this category. So when it comes to Frank, he's from North Carolina, which is considered a part of the South, and even outside of that, he has a huge Southern accent. I think a part of them wanted him to be the gentlemanly Southern guy, but obviously he's the son of a wrestler, so that was a part of why they wanted him cast as well. I think Frank tried to be that in like the first week or so of both of his seasons, but that's just not really who he is. You got the fireball Southern man, and he definitely had more of the redneck tendencies with the vulgarity, the aggression, some of the misogyny that was found on both seasons, a lot of the inappropriate behavior, and he definitely had a lot of trashy behavior and the anger on both of his seasons. But I felt like they still tried to give him the gentlemanly edit on Big Brother 14 because he's a huge favorite. He was one of the only semi-interesting rookies. But when you listen to his conversations with Mike Buggy on the show and on the feeds, and just his behavior with the house guests, that really wasn't how he was like. And then on Big Brother 18, they really didn't protect him at all. They showed a lot more of his vulgar antics. He wasn't the favorite vet anymore. He was the old guy when it came to chronological appearance and his age, and he wasn't seen as that cool anymore, so they didn't really protect him in the edit anymore, and they showed a lot more of the redneck-like tendencies that were always kind of there, but it was ignored due to obvious reasons that I feel like I've already stated. But yeah, I can't believe I forgot about him initially. With Big Brother 14, we have one person, and that is Danielle. I definitely feel like she's a very infamous case of this archetype because if you're just going by the edit, she's this very sweet, very naive competition beast who wanted to do the best, but she was consistently getting played by Dan. She never had any ill will or bad intentions with anything, and she's the perfect Southern Belle. She's very Southern, she loves being Southern, she's very ladylike, she's very nice, and she is very mannerly. But according to them feeds, it was the complete opposite. Apparently, she was a compulsive liar about everything, even small menial stuff that didn't really matter at all. She had a very nasty, catty side to her that really didn't get much focus on the edit. But if you look very closely in the edit, you saw elements of it here and there. She definitely had a pick me, last woman standing type of mentality, which we saw with how she interacted with a lot of the women on the season. And yeah, she's kind of nasty, but they wanted the archetype that she represented to be portrayed in a certain way during the season, and that's why her edit was so one-dimensional. It also didn't help that she was in the showmance with Shane. That wasn't really that reciprocal either, so they wanted a certain narrative. On to the final season in the post-classic era is Big Brother 15. And from a chronological order when it comes to eviction orders, we have Candace, and I believe she is the first non-white person that I have on the list. And for one reason or many, people tend to associate this archetype, whether being a Southern Belle or a redneck or whatever, anything in the South, solely as a white archetype or a stereotype. But Candace definitely fits this. One, she's from Texas, so she's definitely a Southern girl. She definitely has the accent, and she definitely has the poise that is associated with the Southern Belle element, as well as the kind of twang and the pizzazz. I do think some of that came from her being a beauty pageant woman, but you can definitely tell that she carries herself like a very classy Southern woman. And I also think that because she wasn't the only one who fit this archetype from the season, and obviously her racial makeup, it caused, in addition to her being a beauty pageant woman, she got a lot of hatred and blatant racism due to it. So that's definitely an unfortunate element of her experience, as well as a lot of jealousy. In general, she definitely has a lot of the traits for a Southern Belle, but it really wasn't emphasized much on the show, though I think they focused more on her being a beauty pageant, as well as a lot of the unfortunate racial stuff, which just really sucks. So, Jessie is from Texas. I remember her being very proud of being a Texan. But I don't have a whole lot to say about her when it comes to this archetype. She didn't get much characterization on the show, especially characterization that involved her being either a Southern Belle or a redneck or anything in relation to her being a Southern girl. So I don't really have much to add about her here. a lot of her content was about her liking a lot of the guys, and her kind of being the punching bag for some of the women and having a lot of unrequited feelings for some of the men. But there's really just nothing there. Though she did face some hatred from someone else in this archetype, so maybe there was some element of that there. So the third woman in this archetype is Erin, and she, like the other two, are from Texas. I feel like she's the one who definitely had the huge emphasis of being a good old Southern Texan belle. At least that's how she was portrayed in the beginning. Obviously, she's a beauty pageant woman. She's very into being from the South. She used that as an excuse for a lot of her behavior, which just makes people from the South look really, really, really bad. And I do feel like they wanted her to be the Danielle, the Jordan, the Jessica, and the Brittany element, or that type of Southern woman, but she ended up being something completely different because one, she really wasn't a sweet woman. Two, she's not funny. Three, she's not humorous. So they couldn't really portray her in that element, and she really wasn't delusional either. She's just kind of mean, dry, and of course, very racist. And I definitely do think that a part of that was why she was jealous of Candace. Obviously, the racial element was just awful, but the fact that they're both Texans, so they had similarities archetype-wise, not only in that element, but in them being beauty pageant women as well. And she kind of had this weird conflict with Jessie as well, because they're both kind of competing for Judd's attention and affection. And she definitely weaponized the fact that she was a younger, blonde hair, blue eyed Southern woman to her advantage, so a lot of her BS could be overlooked. And the producers tried covering for her for like the first 2 weeks, but then they realized that there's just no hope, to the point where they ended up completely burying her in the edit and kind of blaming her for the racism that was happening in the house and acting like she was the only one, but she was far from the only one. So obviously she's the negative element of this archetype, because any of the positives that they tried to manufacture weren't there, so they just had to completely focus on the negatives, and that's all I care to say about her. So I was going to put Alyssa on here because it states that she's from North Carolina, but I don't know if that's because her husband lived there before they moved to Canada, since Rachel wasn't listed as being from the South either, and I haven't heard anything about the Rileys being from the South, so I'm not going to include her here. It's crazy that we're about, if not a bit more than halfway through the list at this point, and this is only the fourth male on the list, and that is Judd from Big Brother 15. I definitely feel like he was supposed to be the Southern gentleman of the cast, where obviously he has a huge Southern accent. I believe he's also from Texas. Sorry, he's from Tennessee. I just double checked. He was seen as one of the nicer guys of the season. He was very charming. He was very aloof. The house saw him as someone who was very likable and very funny. And it's clear that he was supposed to be the charming Southern gentleman of the cast. And I do think that he, for the most part, lived up to that. He did have his more negative moments in the season, especially with how he talked about some of the others, so it was child's play compared to all the horrible stuff that was happening in the season, and I think that was why he was kind of not angelified, I don't even know if that's a word, but put on a pedestal by some of the fans because they're looking for someone to kind of root for, and Judd definitely fit that mark. He didn't really come off as trashy, though I definitely do think a part of that was due to his love triangle, or less triangle with Erin, and Jesse didn't make it on air. But yeah, he definitely fit the supposedly gentlemanly Southern man on the cast. So I do think that for the men, things start changing for the men of this archetype after him. The final person from Big Brother 15 and the post-classic era that I have here is yet again another man. So hopefully the gender gap is starting to somewhat close, and that is Spencer. Clearly he wasn't supposed to be the Southern gentleman, and he's a man, so he wasn't supposed to be the Southern belle. I felt like he was kind of cast to be the gluttonous Southern man just due to his disposition, and from what he was like in the house, I definitely feel like he was bordering on redneck, or at least in maybe not in appearance, but behavior definitely for sure. He said some of the most vulgar, vile, racist, in general comments all throughout the entire season. He was very trashy, he was very unkept, he was very disrespectful, he was very gluttonous, he was very lazy, and yeah, that definitely was Spencer. And it also helped that he lost power early on in the season and he was the consistent pawn, so he had no control for like 80% of the season due to that. And that's all I care to say about him. But yeah, he's definitely the redneck of the season, or that's why he was cast as. When it came to behavior, there's a lot more rednecks, but I think that was his role when casting put him on cast initially. He just fit it, though others had the same personality as well, even if they weren't a part of this archetype. Now we're in the modern era of BB with Big Brother 16, and we have Amber. So she's an interesting person when it comes to this archetype for a few reasons. One, she talks about being from, I believe, Texas and how she's a Southern girl and all of that, and how she has a Southern flavor, she has a Southern attitude, and the Southern characteristics. But I believe she moved to California by the time, or before she went on Big Brother, so it says she's from California, or her area of residence is in California. But when you hear her talk, and when she talks about her backstory, she mentions the South, and I specifically believe it's Texas. She's also interesting in the fact that the women who generally fit this archetype are white women, and she's a mixed race woman. Sorry. So she's mixed with black and white. And obviously, people always feel some sort of way about someone who isn't white fitting a certain archetype or stereotype. And I think that's why, despite her having a lot of the characteristics of being a Southern Belle, she really wasn't portrayed as such. And I think her and Caleb initially bonded over them being Southerners, but then things went awry, and we could talk about how that could lend to some awkward racial dynamics between men and women in the South historically, but I don't want to go too deep into that. But she really didn't have much agency in the game or in the edit, so I think she was definitely cast to fit this and also be the Southern Belle who can hold a weapon. I remember that was in the intro, and hold up with the guys, but that never actually materialized on the actual season. I do find it, I don't know, interesting is the right word, but she and Candace are both biracial Southern women who went through a lot of vitriol and dislike throughout their seasons, and a part of it definitely had to do with their race. Next on the list from this season is Donnie, and I feel like from this era, just from the quick glance that I looked at the list, there's going to be a bit more men here, so the gender gap is going to balance slightly, or a bit more, or maybe a lot more. So Donnie was clearly cast to be the country bumpkin, southern guy who's very, very, very nice. He lives a very, very simple life, but he's just very nice, he's very gentlemanly. But I think people didn't believe him in the house due to a few reasons. One, I definitely do feel like his appearance is why people didn't believe him. He didn't have much of a dress code. He was just very. His dress code was very down to earth, almost simplistic, like very country like. Two, there's some speculation about him being from the military because it seemed like he was so much smarter than what he tried to come off as, so people were kind of just worried about him too. And three, I also think his appearance, mainly his long beard, his hair, and the graying out too. So I think that kind of rubbed people the wrong way as well. And I think it was one of the reasons why he was automatically on the out, and people just came up with reasons and they had to kind of villainize him. But he obviously fought through, and he only started bonding with people who were either on the complete out or they were on their way out of the house. I also think that due to the cast he was on, where there was a lot of younger people, there's a lot of recruits, there's a lot of people who thought the same way too, it made his journey in Big Brother a lot more challenging and difficult. I think that's what his experience is. But in general, he had a very simplistic edit. They didn't give him a whole lot of complexity. But at the same time, I just think he's a very simplistic man, so his edit kind of just justified it, if that made sense. And he got a good edit because he was a fan favorite. The final person from this season is Caleb. It's clear that they wanted him to be the... Honestly, I don't even... Okay, so obviously they casted two Southern men on the season, but clearly Donnie and Caleb are very different. One's a lot older, another one's a lot younger, one's a lot more muscular and swimwear friendly, the other one isn't. So I'm thinking they wanted Caleb to be the hunky Southern guy, but he didn't really get the heartthrob treatment either. I think it's because he wasn't the smartest, and there's already a few more better looking people that they would have rather pushed as the heartthrob of the season. He wasn't given that, but he talked about his old Southern values, how he's a Southern gentleman, blah, 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 blah. Though we saw a lot of the negative elements of his archetype where he leans towards Redneck when it comes to some of his antics, and he was definitely portrayed as a creep when it came to his interactions with Amber, and there's definitely some sexism that was on the show, but others that wasn't on the show as well, it's just on the feed. But as soon as Amber left, it's like they completely turned around his edit, where he was solely made to be the comedic relief of the season. I don't know if it's because by the second half of the season, there's really nothing going on, and a lot of people were boring, so they decided to give him a more comedic, more positive edit. And a lot of people felt like, okay, this is happening to him because he's a white Southern man who appeals to certain demographics, where if someone acted like Caleb throughout the earlier parts of the season, they wouldn't be redeemed like this. And it's weird because his edits in the first half and the second half are so different, but I don't feel like either portrayal was multifaceted or complex. I'm making sense with all of this. On to Big Brother 17. We are moving on to Clay, and he's from Texas. I believe he's one of the few in this era specifically who came from Texas A&M University or whatever it's called, so that was a little thing for a while. He's definitely someone who's cast as a Southern heartthrobber. He is supposed to be the most gentlemanly person in the house. I do think the producers wanted him to do very well, despite him being a recruit of the show who didn't know much about it. And he was definitely showman's bait, which we got with his showmance with Shelley. And she's going to be honest too. We had a Southern showmance. They were very tight. They relied on one another heavily. But despite Clay being set up as this gentlemanly figure, he got into his fair share of drama. We saw this with his tiff with Devon immediately, which he was very petty about. Then he got into it with Audrey during her last week in the house, so he definitely had a role there. And then we saw him flame out on his final week in the house, and he got very aggressive with James. But interestingly enough, his edits didn't really reflect how negative and ungentlemanly he really was, despite them showing the drama that took place. I hope I'm making sense with all of this. So, we talked about one person from the pairing, so it obviously makes sense to talk about the next person in the pairing, and that is Shelley. It's clear that she was supposed to be the Southern Belle of the cast. That was her archetype, and she was definitely playing into it as well. I remember her freaking out on the live feeds because she couldn't stand the thought of being in the house without makeup, and she had several meltdowns about it, which is just ridiculous, but it also shows how aware of the cameras she was. She and Clay obviously had their connection, partially due to them being Southern people. She kind of had that pageant vibe to her, where she came off as very nice. We could tell there's like a cutting edge, cutthroat, and kind of backstabby, and not the nicest side to her as well. And then as soon as things fell apart, she had several meltdowns about it, and she couldn't really handle it. She kind of had the manufactured elements of the Southern Belle, where they're very curated, but when things didn't go away, she kind of just fell apart. I don't really have much else to say, but out of everyone in the 17 cast, I definitely think she fits this archetype the most. I forgot to mention where Shelley's from, and she's a Georgia peach from Atlanta, if I'm recalling it correctly. So she definitely has that Atlanta, Georgia peach vibe to her, and you can definitely tell. Now we are getting into James from Big Brother 17 and Big Brother 18. He's a very, very unique person in this because, one, he isn't a white person. Two, he's Asian. I don't think we've had an Asian person on this category before in Big Brother history, and he might not be the only one. He's the only full Asian person that I do feel confident about. Obviously, James is from Texas. He lived in Texas. He grew up in Texas. And I think what makes him more interesting is that he grew up with a white family, so he was adopted into a white family. So he obviously had to deal with being a non white person with a white family due to adoption. And he also adapted to his environment where he obviously has the thick southern accent. He believes in a lot of the values, and a lot of the clothing that he wore in Big Brother was very stereotypical for a southern person. And I definitely think that they cast him with the intention that he would fit that Donnie archetype. They both wear the hats, they both wear the overalls. A lot of the times they're both seen as simpler country or small town men. Honestly, I don't even think James was from a small town, but just because he wears some of the same outfits as Donnie, they kind of tried to pin him in that direction. But yeah, I feel like James is a very unique house guest. A lot of his humor came from the fact that he's Southern. People were shocked that someone who looks like James, i.e., an Asian man, has a Southern accent, though that's kind of. I think that says a lot. I could delve into that potentially, but I'm just gonna leave that alone. And the fact that we saw him back to back showed that they liked it, but I also think he started putting on a bit more in a second season due to him knowing the reception that he got from his first season. I hope I'm making sense with this. Alrighty, so the first newbie from Big Brother 18 that I am referencing is Zakia, and I don't have a whole lot to say about her. She is from North Carolina, so she's a southern woman, and she's mainly on here due to her intro. They talk a lot about her being a classy Southern Belle type, so it's clear that was one of the reasons why they cast her for the show. And if I'm remembering correctly, I believe they had her at like some sort of like shooting ranch or whatever, where it was to show that she's just as tough as all the guys and whatnot. So it's clear she was cast to be in the quote unquote colored Southern Belle archetype, kind of like Amber and Candace, were just recently spoke about. But when she got in the house, she didn't get that coverage. She didn't really get much content at all. So it kind of just fell flat overall. So the main person in this cast, in my opinion, that fits this archetype is Corey. Obviously, he's a Texan. He was very proud of being a Texan. He talked about it quite a lot on the show and on the feeds. And it's clear to me that he was supposed to replicate Clay from the last season with being the quote unquote heartthrob Southern gentleman type, though I don't think he ended up being the biggest heartthrob of the season, but we'll get there when we get to that video at some point. But yeah, he definitely had the Southern accent. He got with Nicole, the Nicole's from the Midwest. They kind of represented the all-American couple. But he was definitely a lot more relaxed and under the radar than Clay. He was honestly very boring, and I don't know if hiding behind bigger personalities is the way I should form it, but he was definitely the Robin to Polly's Batman, so I definitely think that played a part in his coverage. But it's clear that he was meant to cast in this lane. He did have some problematic commentary on the feeds, but didn't make it on the episodes. So, in a way, he kind of got an alibi due to it. Overall, I don't have a whole much to say about Corey, but that's just my thoughts on him in general. Alrighty, so we have a few people to talk about when it comes to Big Brother 19, and the first is Cody. Okay, what can I say about Cody? I don't know if I'm gonna go all the way in or just keep it cute. Um, Obviously, Cody is from Texas, and when you think of the stereotypical Texan, someone like Cody might come up. someone who is heavily conservative, though they don't even air that type of content now like they would back in Kent's day. But if you watch the feeds, you know he has beliefs on climate change in the sense that he doesn't believe climate change exists. He believes the earth is flat. There is the transphobia that was very prominent on the show. He's a believer in guns. He's a huge military guy. He wants a huge family, all of that. So some of the lighter elements of that made it onto the show. I don't know if they wanted him to be the Southern gentleman or yeah, I think they wanted him to be the military family man, but not necessarily the Southern gentleman, if that makes sense. I think when it comes to his personality, he has a lot of redneck tendencies, especially with how argumentative and aggressive he was with a lot of the house guests. Obviously, a lot more of his negative traits were overshadowed due to the dynamics of the season, especially with Paul's cult and with him being on the out. So kind of forced him to be in the underdog position where on any other season he probably would have been severely hated on. And because of that, it made him put in this Southern gentleman box kind of just by virtue, and then you saw the ups and downs of his relationship with Jessica. That's all I care to really say. But I also noticed that he tended to bond with other Southern people like an Elena, and he had an affinity towards Jason too, though Jason never really gave a crap about Cody either, so I guess you bond with people who you're similar with, and you tend to overlook certain things when you have certain similarities to someone. Next is Elena, and I don't have a whole lot to say about her. It was clear to me that they wanted her to be the very outspoken, sassy, southern girl, but when she got into the house, she really wasn't that. She followed the crowd because she thought that it would help her last longer in the game. And she talked about getting all sorts of screen time, but it never really materialized. She did bond with the likes of Cody, so there's interest there, and she was initially close with Raven, who will also be on this list. But I think she just kind of suffered because she was too much into curating her own image, and she didn't really deliver in what the producers thought she was going to deliver. So she herself didn't really get much coverage, despite her fitting this archetype. And she is another Texan woman, so she fits here. So I was going to add Jason because I thought he was a southern guy, but he's from Iowa, which is in the Midwest, hence him not being here. The final person on this category for Big Brother 19 is most definitely Raven. And out of anyone within this era, I definitely feel like Raven was cast specifically to be the sweet Southern Belle. Obviously, she has the story and the reality of her life with living with a pacemaker, which makes her life very difficult, and it caused a lot of it definitely caused a lot of trials and tribulations for her, and the fact that she's still living and still doing a lot, and it's a huge part of her identity and life. Obviously, it gave her a positive element to her portrayal, and we saw that a lot throughout the season. She had a huge accent, she's from Arkansas, she has the southern look, and she definitely portrayed herself as a southern belle, and she played it up for the cameras a lot. The issue with Raven is that she tended to over exaggerate a lot and borderline lie. She had the Danielle Murphy thing going for her. So yeah, she's similar to her in that way. And if you know, you know, she definitely had a lot of trashy behavior, mainly due to her being a part of the Paul cult throughout the season. And I just think a lot of her behavior in general. And I think due to all this, she didn't get a whole lot of screen time, as well as her not winning any competitions, compared to a Danielle Murphy. On to Big Brother 20, we have Winston, and he's from Kentucky. From what I remember about him from his intro, they showed him off with his guns and how he's a traditional country southern man. They initially tried to portray him as like a southern gentleman, but when he got into the house, that didn't really take place. And I think part of that was due to his overt paranoia and his deep aggression. But obviously, he went home very, very early in the season. He didn't really hit it off with the women, but you can definitely see hints of the southern elements within his journey, and especially in his intro package, which is always based on what casting is hoping that he will be like once he is on the show. And when they casted him, that was their goal for him. Haley is next on the list, and she's from Texas. I don't know if she's an A&M Texas girl or Texan girl. It wouldn't shock me based on the amount of A&M people from this era, but there was a whole lot of focus on her being a student. I remember her intro showing that she could get down in the farms and stuff, and she's a country gal, but she's also very educated and sophisticated as well. Though I'm pretty sure she said some of that intro stuff was pretty fake, which isn't surprising to me at all. But it's clear that she was cast to be the Southern Belle, who was very young and educated and innocent. Unfortunately for her, or fortunately for her, depending on how you see it, she was aligned with all of the oddballs who kept on screwing up. So whenever they got power, they kept on screwing it up. They were always blindsided. And I think due to her being the pretty young white Southern Belle, she definitely got a lot of sympathy compared to all of her allies. And she was seen as robbed and someone who could have been better, though she was pretty much just as bad as a lot of the others. At the same time, she wasn't faking being a nice Southern belle, so I definitely do give her props for that, and she didn't really seem manufactured or curated. The final person from this is Sam, who's from Virginia, and I feel like she is the most hardcore country slash Southern woman from this era, essentially. And I do think she was cast to kind of be like the female version of Donnie and James, where they wore denim everywhere. They had outfits. She had the heaviest country accent. She was seen as like a farmer, or a very rural woman. And I think they thought that she would be a sweetheart initially, and we somewhat got that in the first week or so, but then she became very, very weird, very, very antisocial, and she had this very weird misogyny. And she showed that whenever she interacted with most other women, and she kind of was very male identified as well. And due to her not liking the Big Brother experience, they couldn't really edit her as the sweetheart that they wanted her to. She threatened to quit several times, and she didn't really give production much. So, with Big Brother 21, I have Catherine on the list since she's from Texas. She talks a lot about being from Texas, and it's clear from her intro she was supposed to be cast as the sweet and sassy Southern Belle, and I do think for the most part she did live up to this, though she was definitely a lot more contrived, a lot more performative, and a lot more unnatural than a lot of the other women who have not only been in this archetype, but the badass woman archetype that is something else outside of this. I had a few other people on this on this archetype from Big Brother 21, but they apparently weren't from the South, so I didn't include them. That's really all I have to say about Catherine. And the final person from not only the season, but the modern era of Big Brother that I have in this category is Cliff from Big Brother 21. Just from looking at him, it's obvious what type of archetype that they're going with. They had him wear the cowboy hat a lot of the times in the promo shoots. He even wore it a decent amount of times in the season. His wardrobe kind of gave it away sometimes. He has a very strong Southern accent, and he talked a decent amount about being a Texan. So I think they wanted him to be like a Donnie type of representative throughout the season. And in certain ways, he lived up to it, but in other ways, he didn't, as I definitely do think he has a meaner streak in comparison. And that's all I care to say about him, to be honest. Now we are moving on to the current era that we are in with Big Brother 23, and we only have one person that I'm going to put on here, rather than being a silent person affected, obviously each part of their casting, is Frenchie. The fact that there's only one person might have to do with the increased diversity in this era, but I don't have the data in that for sure. So Frenchie, obviously, just from looking at him, it's clear that he was cast to be the country bumpkin kind of person. He had the overalls, the very simplistic wear. He had the wardrobe. He had the very, very thick accent. But the interesting thing about him is that he is very active on Twitter, and he was supposedly a lot more liberal, and you could arguably say he was a lot more woke, where he talked about protecting women, protecting people of color, and all of that stuff. But they were the main people that he nominated and targeted throughout the week, only for things to change. He kissed up to a lot of the athletic white men that he demonized initially, and then it was just very, very awkward. And then he had some very weird and energy towards certain people too. So he was kind of like a reversal of. Sorry, he was supposed to be the reverse of the archetype, but he fell into a lot of the similar pathologies as well. I only have one person from Big Brother 24 on this video, this archetype, this casting archetype, and that is Jasmine from Big Brother 24. Obviously, there's a lot of reasons why she's on this category, quite frankly. One, she is from Atlanta, Georgia, so she's a Georgia peach. So she definitely fits the qualification based off of her location. But I feel like she's the perfect blend of both, actually. She's obviously a Southern Belle. She knows how to present herself very well when she needs to be. She has a very big personality. She has a way of orating that's very similar to a Southern Belle. She has an accent, though she definitely over-exaggerates and over-extenuates it on purpose in the diary room. She plays it up like she's a big country bumpkin a lot of times in the diary room, especially the catchphrases that the producers give her, so that kind of has an element to her that's very overproduced. But when you look at her behavior in the house, you definitely see some of that redneck-ish behavior where she's very vile, she's very crass, she's very inappropriate, she didn't have the best manners at all. She wasn't seen as the cleanest person, she's obsessed with food and all of that. So yeah, she definitely fits this archetype, and she's a color woman or multi-generationally mixed black woman who fits this category, and it's always interesting to see non-white people who fit this category. So that's all I have to say about her. So Riley to me was obviously someone who was supposed to be the Southern Belle of the cast, and I feel like they wanted her to kind of be like the OG Southern Belles, a la Krista and then Amy, where they're a bit more realistic, but still kind of flawed, if that makes sense. She had a lot of the guys kind of fawning for her. They wanted her approval. She had a way with men that wasn't really like flirty or whatever, but they were just drawn to her. But she really couldn't handle the game, despite her winning 8 to 8 and having a lot of setup to do well, but she just got outplayed. And she's a Tennessee woman, and her archetype, or her being a Southern woman, definitely was very, very, very prominent, hence me including her here. But she didn't last long to do much anyways. The next person from this season that I'm placing on this list is Red, and he's from Tennessee. Oh, I also forgot to mention that Riley's from Tennessee too, so two people from that state's pretty interesting. Just from looking at him, it's so clear that they wanted to go with a more country bumpkin-like person, someone who's a more over-exaggerated version of a James, a Donnie, even a Cliff, to be honest. He had the very, very, very large beard. He had the overalls, the denim, the outfits, the hat, the very thick accent, and if I'm remembering it correctly, he's a huge TikTok personality, so there's an element of him that definitely put on the fact that he's a country bumpkin for social media clout, and them casting him due to his TikTok kind of just reaffirmed everything. He didn't really care much for the game. He definitely had a very, very, very strong bromance with someone who will be on this archetype in Cameron, so at least we can see two people from this archetype being very, very, very close friends. And yeah, I think he's arguably the most stereotypical man on this list just based on that. The final person from this season that I have on this tier list is Cameron, and he's a Georgia Peach, or the male Georgia Peach, or whatever the male version of that is, as he's from Georgia. So with Cameron, he obviously has the very, very, very thick accent. He was in the military, and for some reason, the military is often associated with the South, or more Southern people go into the military. I would probably have to do more research about that. He was seen as a very traditional family man since he's a single father. He talked about his traditional Southern values a lot. He had a very, very, very thick accent. He bonded a lot with Red throughout the season due to their similar um, mentalities, values, and they had a kinship due to their location and both being Southern men, though there were some problematic elements, especially on Cameron's end with how he treated and spoke to people. And I definitely think that him being this traditional Southern man and him getting a huge edit because he was supposed to underdog caused him to be a casual favorite. And we've kind of seen this a few times with people from the South who ended up being America's favorite player due to this. Alrighty, and we're finally at the final season as I'm recording this, and we have a couple here. So obviously, going by chronological order, I have to talk about Matt. And what's interesting about him is that he's not white, or at least fully white, but he ended up in this archetype. But he talked a lot more about his Asian heritage than his white heritage. Just from the intros, from what I remember, they showed him off being a very southern guy who has these southern roots. I think he's from Atlanta, Georgia, so he's a Georgia Peach, or the male version of that. He was definitely set up to be kind of akin to like the southern heartthrobs of Era 3, but a Asian version of that. But ultimately, it didn't really fall through, but you could tell production really, really, really wanted him to stay, especially with how hard they pushed his and Mackenzie's budding showmance, which was going to be the southern romance of the season that casuals ate up. And the final person overall on this list is the other person in the pair in Mackenzie. If I'm remembering it correctly, she's from Texas. She talked about how she could keep up with all the guys, and she's very, very, very tough and can get her hands dirty despite being a very pretty southern woman. She didn't have too much of an accent, if I'm remembering it correctly, but she did seem relatively aloof in the game for a lot of it, and there is kind of a stigmatization about southern males or southern women being aloof, though I don't know if it had to do with that or it's mainly just her age, in addition to her not knowing a whole lot. Obviously, she got mad at Angela due to her showmance with Matt being cut in the very first week. Oh, I also forgot to mention that she and Matt also bonded a lot over religion, and she talked a lot about it after the house. I definitely think there's an element there that can be traced to Southern roots where it's seen that Southern people are a lot more religious in comparison. But compared to the other women on this list, she was very neutered down in comparison, though obviously her being from Texas definitely got brought up a decent amount throughout the season, and I shockingly don't have a whole lot else to say about her. Thank goodness that was done, or that is done, my bad. That took a lot longer to record and make than I thought it was going to, and I didn't even add everyone that I very well could have added. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting group of people, especially with the demographic being a huge focus in their casting and how they are portrayed, and all that jazz. The next category is the punk slash goth slash alternative tier, or casting archetype. That has much less people just in general, so I know the video won't be that long. But anyways, thank you all for watching, and I'll be back soon. Take care.